Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. Here's the president of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, John Denuzzo.
Hello, this is John Denuzzo, Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance. I am joined from Goochland, Virginia, Dr. Bruce Venter, our trustee. Bruce.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good.
Can you hear me all the way up there in New York?
Yes, it's a
long way.
The magic of radio transmission.
Yes.
So, and there's Molly Brandt in the background even.
That's right. She must be seeing a deer out on the lawn.
So let's talk about Knox's Noble Artillery Train, first of all. Can you just kind of describe what that was all about?
Well, Knox was a 25-year-old bookseller over in Boston, and he was very much enamored with the revolution that had started at Lexington and Concord. And he got himself linked up with George Washington, who had been appointed commander of all the American forces over at Boston. And he had all of his training in artillery had been by the book. He wasn't a part of an artillery unit per se, and he would study his books that he was selling, and then he would present that information to Washington. Washington said, well, we have a lot of artillery up there at Fort Ticonderoga and Crown Point, where Ethan Allen had captured it with his Green Mountain Boys. Of course, our own personal hero, John Brown, was with him. And so Washington needed cannon for the siege of Boston. He wanted to train the guns on the British who owned the city at the time. And he sends Knox and Knox's brother up to retrieve the cannon. And what's interesting about this whole expedition is that he's a young guy. He doesn't go up there with an army or anything. He relies on Teamsters, local Teamsters, to be able to drag the cannon from Fort Ticonderoga and Crown Point. They put them on sleds. I think there were 59 altogether. And they used draft horses. First, they came down Lake George and landed at the southern shore of Lake George by Fort George. And then they put them on sleds after he had waited a few weeks for the snow to arrive up there, which perhaps there'll be snow for December 12th. I don't know. But anyway, he puts them on the sleds and he brings them down all the way to Albany, across the Mohawk River. Then he crosses the Hudson River. He takes them all the way over the Berkshires. And when he's in the Berkshires, he's going to need oxen to get them up and down those mountains. And he'll finally get them over to Boston by the end of February. And the Americans will put those cannon up on Dorchester Heights in March and scare the heck out of the British. It's going to cause General Howe, the commander in Boston at the time, to evacuate the city. So it's a great victory. It's a somewhat bloodless victory in a sense. It's a very successful campaign for the Americans.
Fantastic. And the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance is calling to mind Knox's incredible achievement with several events. One is on Tuesday, December the 9th. There are 5 Knox memorials in Warren County, and at each of those, we're going to have a ceremony with a replica linstock, including the town historian, the town supervisor or mayor, as the case may be. And in several of them, we'll have a representation from the county 250th anniversary commission, the county historian, and the Daughters of the American Revolution. They'll all be participating. That's on Tuesday, December the 9th. You'll see some publicity on that in the coming days. I also want to call attention to what we're doing at Lake George Battlefield on December the 12th, the afternoon. We're going to reenact Knox's arrival, as Bruce said, at the head of Lake George, which is the south end of Lake George. Bruce, you know what we're doing that day?
Yes, I understand that you've engaged a real live Henry Knox to come on shore in a bateau. And I think you have draft horses available. You have the sleds that were constructed by the students at the Saratoga BOCES. And there are some replica cannon tubes that are going to be tied onto the sleds. So folks that come to that reenactment will get a pretty good idea, there are 2 sleds, of what it would have been like in 1775.
That's absolutely true. And it will take place starting at 3 o'clock on Friday, December the 12th. It's the first in our public series of events that will be happening that day, commemorating Knox and the American Revolution. We will have a tent set up in case of inclement weather. We'll have at least 40 living historians, or reenactors as we call them, in the fields demonstrating their wares. We'll have a bateau, as Bruce said, and the bateau will actually be transporting Knox, the Knox reenactor, coming to the head of the lake. So just as Knox did 250 years ago, you'll be seeing someone on a bateau coming to the head of the lake and seeing his arrival. There'll be a ceremony there. We'll have music. We'll have a fife and drum duo from the Glens Falls Symphony Orchestra and all sorts of entertainment. We're giving away some replica flags of the period, such as the Continental Army used in 1775, 1776. We'll have programs for people to tell them what's going on. And we'll have Walt Adams from Lake Radio, Lake FM. They are kind of narrating the story of what's happening. So people, of all ages will be learning firsthand how Knox did it and what he did. You mentioned his brother. Was his brother a prominent part of Knox's Noble Artillery train, Bruce?
Yes, because many times Knox was not personally with the train, but he had his brother stay with the train while he was out either scouting routes or talking to people like Philip Schuyler, who was instrumental in securing sleds and horses for this operation. And I think folks should realize that this was not, in a sense, a military operation, because these were not soldiers that were transporting these cannon. These were teamsters, so these were civilians. So when people come to the reenactment, they'll see reenactors, but they can't expect them to be in blue uniforms or brown uniforms or whatever. They're not Continental soldiers. These are men who made their living as teamsters. And there's one wonderful account written by one of the teamsters and his son called Ye Cohorn Caravan. And it documents their participation in this operation. So it'll be an interesting thing. If people are looking for soldiers, they better look for teamsters instead.
As I mentioned at the top of this, on Tuesday, December the 9th, we're going to have a ceremony at each of the Knox monuments in Warren County. And I know Washington County is doing it as well. And I believe Saratoga County also, but not on December the 9th. So our day is December the 9th. The 5 Knox memorials in Warren County, which trace his steps, begin going north to south at Sabbath Day Point, which is on private property, Bruce noted on our radio cast. Bolton Landing in Lake George Battlefield Park, and along Route 9 in Queensbury / Lake George, right? I think it's just into Lake George along Route 9, the east side of Route 9. And finally, just north of Crandall Park on Route 9 in the near the Queensbury Glens Falls city line. The ceremony will have the mayor of Glens Falls, the mayor of Lake George, as well as the Queensbury, Lake George, Hague, and Bolton supervisors and their historians at these events. So I'd encourage people to come out. You'll see it publicized in local media, or you can contact us at info@lakegeorgebattlefield.org if you want more information. I'd like to say also that in addition to what we're doing at Lake George Battlefield Park on December the 12th, the following day, the morning of Saturday the 13th, in Washington County, specifically from Fort Edward to Fort Miller, there will be a representation of Knox's Noble Artillery train. They'll be carrying the same replica linstock that we are using earlier in the week in Warren County. That afternoon, Saturday the 13th, in Saratoga County, particularly in Schuylerville and Stillwater, there will be events commemorating Knox. Then on Sunday the 14th, the artillery train will continue a procession from Peebles Island, which is the southernmost part of Saratoga County, over the Mohawk and into Cohoes, and from there to the Van Skyke Mansion, which is, I know it's one of Bruce's favorites, a genuine of the period mansion that the Van Skyke family held in Cohoes. And then finally at the Schuyler Mansion in Albany that afternoon, Sunday, December 14th. So, Bruce, any commentary before we break on this podcast on any of those sites I mentioned?
Yeah, I think people should know that these monuments to Knox and the noble train of artillery were put up in 1926 by the state of New York and by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They tracked the noble train from Fort Ticonderoga all the way over to Dorchester Heights. So if anybody wants to, on their own, follow these markers, it's interesting journey to take. But sometimes, people run tours of these markers, and you can get the individual stories in that way too.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. I want to just emphasize to people as well, our event on December the 12th, the afternoon starting at 3 o'clock, we will have reenactors galore. We'll also have a cannon firing on the lake as the bateau makes its way toward shores, kind of a salute and hail to those who will be greeting Knox. And there will also be a volley of congratulations to Knox upon his arrival and setting foot on shore. Now, one way, Bruce, I know that people can find out exactly where that Knox Trail is, all the way from basically Crown Point or Ticonderoga to Boston. I know there's a place on Wikipedia, if you Google Knox Noble Artillery Train Trail or something to that effect, they list all the stops on that. But last year, Bruce, I remember taking a bus tour that your company ran that took us basically from the top, Ticonderoga, all the way to the Springfield, Mass area.
We had a nice bus tour last year, and we're going to continue the route next year, the first weekend in June 3 to 6. And we'll start at Springfield and make our way all the way over to Dorchester Heights. And it will include a lot of nice different stops at historic buildings and what have you. And they could find out that information on our website. We'll be calling it the Knox's Noble Train Part 2, and we'll list all of the details that people will want to know about.
Okay, the excitement is in the air at Lake George, and I hope you, those of you who are listening elsewhere, will make your way to Lake George on December the 12th for our Knox events. Our website is lakegeorgebattlefield.org. We thank you for being a part of our history. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you very much, Kevin, for being with us. You opened the window for us a bit to learn more about living historians and what they do. Thank you also, David, for your answers on kind of the practicalities of how you work the lake on your bateaus. Very interesting stuff. Now, you can see these men and their crewmates in action on Friday, December the 12th, in a reenactment of Henry Knox's landing in a replica bateau at Dog Beach in Lake George, and then being pulled by draft horse to the entrance of Fort George, where Knox actually stayed for over 2 weeks in 1775. That's free, begins at 3 o'clock that afternoon. The other commemorative events that day include a reception with historian Rick Atkinson at the Holiday Inn, Lake George. Later that afternoon, they're just sold out. There's a free public kind of conversation with Rick Atkinson that night at 7 o'clock. Rick will field questions and sign books, which will be for sale there. So a lot of great American history still happening at Lake George. Our website's lakegeorgebattlefield.org. We thank you for being a part of our history.
Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. For more information or to check out the latest podcast, go to lakegeorgebattlefield.org and listen live on Saturday mornings to Lake George Battlefield Moments on 93.5 Lake FM.